My name is Ruben Parra Cardona, and I'm a Mexican origin. I've been an immigrant in the U.S. since 1999, and I think this journey started without me having a clear idea of what today would be for me and my family. Originally, I came to this country just with the dream and idea of becoming a family therapist at the master's level and going back to Mexico and offering back the training that I could get here. But life operates in fascinating ways, and the master's opened the opportunity to a PhD after I met extraordinary colleagues, Liz Wheeling, Richard Wampler, who opened a new chapter in my life that I never considered it was possible. So I think my journey as an immigrant has been one of discovering dreams and discovering that dreams can come true. And that has been truly beautiful, and I feel very privileged about that. But at the same time, I think my journey has brought me close to the realities of Latino immigrants, of my people. I see myself reflected in them, of continuing oppression, discrimination, exclusion, which is particularly blatant now in the current political situation in this Trump-Hillary election. Many people express their surprise at the level of hatred and the racist or ethnocentric undertones. But to me, that's everyday business. And I think it's because we work with very underserved, low-income Latino populations. So it's just that I think now we're having a more honest conversation about it, and people are coming more overtly about these issues. So it's a different perspective for me. So as a result of that, as I was getting my training, I became aware of the tremendous privilege that as a Latino immigrant, I was accumulating with my knowledge and what I could do with my knowledge. I could aspire to have a career. I could uh, aspire to have a great life doing what I work without many of the fears and worries that I see impact Latino immigrant on a everyday life. So that's why I became very, very focused on Latino immigrants. And I think I've always considered myself a fighter. And I remember in one of the most powerful experiences as an undergrad was one of the former guerrilla fighters in the El Salvador Civil War, a Jesuit, was one of my teachers. And, he talked about how he fought in the armed conflict, how he killed people, how some of his friends were killed. And, I said to him, why are you at a university? And he said, because I have realized after so much blood and loss and pain that a university setting can be one of the most powerful ways to promote change because of the contact you have with people, because of the initiatives you can launch on your own. And that was very inspiring. So I think if you can do that in Latin American university settings, in the United States, the level of privilege and access to resources is tremendous. And that's when I made the decision that, I want to commit myself. I was not clear that I was going to become a permanent resident here in the U.S., but I knew I wanted to offer something very meaningful. The other piece, I think, as an immigrant was anger about the historical perspective of Latino immigrants in the U.S., because I grew up seeing major manufacturing companies in the southern border with Texas. So if you can think about clothing, if you can think about automobile makers, a number of products and services that we acquire here, I saw them all my life being produced in the border. But for example, I would see a Nike factory and I knew I could never buy a pair of Nike shoes at the price that they were being produced there. I had to cross the border and then buy them at the price here. But I saw the all other history side of the story of producing that pair of Nike shoes, which were the very long working hours of the maquiladora workers that would last all the way to 10 hours, the poverty situation in which they lived, that despite that income, it was kind of an arrangement, a capitalist arrangement in which Mexico would say you cannot pay worker more than $6-7 per hour, and the transnational companies would say, well, we will go with your laws. But in a very very that level. We will go with your laws without any commitment to fight for that. So I think the anger about that informs my work is when I hear all these narratives about these Latino immigrants are taking our jobs, they're stealing our jobs. It's like this historical amnesia, selective amnesia, that in the moments of greatest burden and greatest challenge to the United States, Latino immigrant populations have played a crucial role for the survival of this country and for thriving of this country. In World War II, we had the Bracero programs in which Latino immigrants were actively recruited from Mexico, were courted to come to the U.S. because the U.S. was at the brink of collapsing. And now that we have economic downturns, we look to them as scapegoats to the immigrant population, and we say these Latino immigrants are the cause of our problems. So I think that selective amnesia and the way in which the discourse changes across the history propelled me to embrace Latino immigrants in my program of research. So I couldn't find in many ways, like the political or other ways, but I know I could fight through my science, and in a science that would be social justice informed. And that's when I started to document the experiences of parents in this country. In one of our papers, trabajando duro todos los días, working hard every day, I think goes at the core of who we are as Latino immigrants. But at the same time, that's when I started to document all the discriminatory experiences against Latinos. And I love the United States. I mean, I truly want to become a U.S. citizen because of the so many extraordinary opportunities I receive in this country. But because I love this country, I also want to indicate to this country what needs to be done, the human rights battles that have not been fought and that we need to embrace. And so that I knew at that point I was going to focus on Latino immigrant parents in terms of being a medium, a way of giving voice to their experience. And as I work more with Latino immigrant populations, another experience that was very painful to me was the disproportionate minority confinement to which African Americans and Latino are exposed. And I work with a lot of Latino juveniles in the justice system, and how very oppressive ethnocentric legislation and laws can really destroy an adolescent's life, how you can go to jail for smoking a joint. So rather than addressing an issue as a public health perspective, you address it with a very punitive system. And in a system in which if you're poor, if you're a minority, you are going to really get screwed because you will not have the opportunities that non-majority whites and higher income can have. So as a result of that, I really focus on adolescents, but as a result of working many years with them, I realized that I was working with at the end point of the problem. I was working with the adolescent families once. There was a lot of hurt, hate in those adolescents. There was a lot of trauma. And that's when I started to wonder, what is it that we can do to prevent these kids from getting there? And that's a huge, huge question. It's a policy question, human rights question. The fact that many states in the United States still consider corporal punishment in schools as legal. I mean, it's written in the law, it's legal. Tells us about how much remains to be done in the U.S. But that's one layer, because when then you look which students, what's the demographic of those students who are mostly penalized by corporal punishment, then you see minorities. So that's just an example of much that remains to be done in the United States. So that's when I decided, okay, one way of preventing these youth from getting there is to work with parents right from the beginning. And that's when I started to launch qualitative studies to listen from their experiences, and after listening to their stories, to listen to the adversity they were exposed to, the desire to be good parents but not knowing how. That's when I said I need to embrace parenting, I need to embrace primary prevention. So that journey was fascinating, with so many colleagues that have touched my lives across my time here. during my graduate education, the incredible fortune of coming across extraordinary parenting researchers, but also social justice researchers, health disparities researchers, basic scientists, sociologists. So I think it's been an integration of many that I have integrated all the many pieces in the direction of my work. So that's why I have embraced cultural adaptation. How is it that we can take interventions that we know work well with families, and particularly on parenting, and how can we disseminate them in a way that they are culturally relevant, that they take social justice into consideration, and in a way in which I could also channel this anger that has informed my work in terms of how do I fight the fight in order to give voice to this population to offer a contribution. So it's been a fascinating journey of 10 years working with first-generation Latino immigrant parents. I've been very grateful about receiving federal funding, which is another expression of the privileges we have in the United States, and that dreams can really happen in this country, and which is one of the main motivators I have had as an immigrant. So I think being an immigrant in the U.S. is this fascinating mixture of experiences, because one day you can be discriminated in Walmart because of your accent. The next day you can receive funding to the work with minority populations. One day you can hear Trump's messages about hatred, and then the next day you see extraordinary expressions of resilience and solidarity. So it's like a pendulum that always moves but keeps moving, which is fascinating. So in those 10 years in my work with families, I think the parenting work has touched me in so many ways, but there are specific ways in which I've been particularly touched. The first one is that through parenting work is a beautiful way of addressing transgenerational trauma. And many of the hardworking immigrants in the United States, they carry wounds from their countries of origin because they were raised according to very harsh parenting practices. They were exposed to a lot of adversity. But it's because they come also from contexts in which their parents didn't have the support. Their parents were exposed to adversity. So one of the components in our program that creates the most reactivity from parents is when we start the intervention, we say, you need to motivate your kid, you need to recognize their efforts, you need to reward their efforts. And parents really jump at that and say, why are we going to do that? We're just going to make them weak to the society that just tends to oppress you and discriminate against you. So working through parenting and healing that transgenerational trauma has been wonderful because it's not related to a single event. It's about a way of living that has been traumatic to parents, but also has represented a very profound loss. But then when parents recreate a relationship with their children, when parents start giving and they start receiving from their children as a result of that giving, there's a very powerful healing process that takes place. The other level of trauma that we experience is the experience of becoming an immigrant, of all the point of how they cross, what informed their crossing, particularly with females, everything that they experience on sexual violence as they cross. And we have seen how parenting can also be a very powerful alternative for healing and giving a new dimension to all the suffering and sacrifices that parents have experienced that way. The other way is parenting. For many immigrants, there's so much out of control. Many of our parents have to have 2 jobs. Many of them work up to 14 hours per day. Many of them have very limited breaks, if at all, in their workplaces, and they can never fight back because they know if I rebel, they can throw me into jail, they can send me to the authorities, etc. So parenting can be a very powerful source in which parents can find a source of inspiration to cope with that adversity. So none of these should be taken in a way that, oh, because if we have that, we're done. There are so many human rights battles that need to continue to be fought in the U.S. There are so many social justice issues that need to continue to be addressed. But in the meantime, I have found that working with families around what they have control, which is their parenting, can be extremely powerful in terms of embracing that sense of resilience. The same thing happened to us when the war on drugs started in Mexico, and I started to consult with family therapists in the border with Ciudad Juarez. You know, in Ciudad Juarez there was so much violence taking place, shootings, kidnapping. And one of the most powerful feedback I have received from one of the participant therapists was that, we are immersed in so much chaos, but when you come, you remind us of what we have control over. Even if it's just the four walls that create our home, we have control over that. We have control over how we treat our kids, how we engage with them, how much we tell them I love them, how we guide them. So that was tremendously powerful. So that was a new dimension of parenting that was very important to me. So in a nutshell, that has been my work, and that's the dream in terms of knowing that as Latino immigrants, I'm one of the Latino immigrants in this country, but I'm a very, very, very privileged Latino immigrant. So I cannot in any way consider myself close to the realities of the many realities of many Latino immigrants who are in this country exposed to so much oppression, pain, injustice. But I know that by using that privilege, I can bring resources that help them frame reality in a different way, change their daily interactions with family in a different way. And for many of them have even had expanded those skills that they have learned in our parenting program to their job settings and have led them to more work efficiency, promotion. So it's been a really wonderful journey. Now I think I'm entering a new phase in my life and professional life in which I see that it's very important for me through my work impact structural issues. That's why I'm aligning much closer with social policy people because although through our parenting work we have found that is a very wonderful way to get to populations, support populations, we have important structural issues in the United States that need to be addressed. The example of corporal punishment is one that I was taken aback the first time one of a researcher on these issues told me about, issues of gender-based violence, the issue of immigration, which is so huge that it's not how are we going to fix this problem, how are we going to take into account the ways in which we have engaged Latin American countries, courted them, used them when we needed them, discarded them when we didn't need them. So I think in a way, the day-to-day work that I do in communities and with parents have led me to this new phase in my work in which I will continue to do the parenting work that nourishes my soul, but also how through that work we can create bridges with ways of impacting structures and systems that can create change. So I think in a way, when I think about the woman's right to vote, the civil rights, how all those big movements were tied to structural changes. And I think we need to advance in many camps, in many alternatives, in many paths. So I see myself as a scientist, as a prevention scientist, as a parenting expert, yes, as a family therapist, but I also want to see myself more into that social policy and agent for change, working with others to make a difference. And I think the dream is that in the future, all individuals can engage the same human rights, all children can engage the same human rights, and I think we need new models in which our scientific work can be tied to human rights work. And that's a dream. And hopefully I will have sufficient time to at least do the initial steps and then pass the baton to a new generation of people that's already happening. But that's a dream that is ahead.